Let me say something that might make you uncomfortable, but stick with me for a second. Imagine we're sitting side by side. No audience. No comments section. Just you and me. And I ask you one honest question. Have you ever felt like the more effort you put into a woman, the more distant she became? Like the more consistent, loyal, and emotionally available you were, the less interested she seemed? Now here's the controversial part. It's not that she didn't like you. It's not that you weren't enough. It's that you were trying to connect with an avoidant woman using rules that only work on emotionally open people. Most men are taught that relationships are built by proving value, showing consistency, reassurance, and emotional presence. That advice sounds good. It feels mature. But with avoidant personalities, that exact strategy often backfires. Not because avoidants are broken or cruel, but because they experience closeness very differently. Avoidants don't chase connection the way you do. They chase a feeling of freedom, a feeling of space, a feeling of emotional safety without pressure. And here's where men get it wrong. They try to force stability when avoidants are drawn to emotional breathing room. This video is not about manipulation. It's not about tricking someone. And it's definitely not about controlling another person. It's about understanding the fantasies avoidants already have: freedom, independence, emotional calm, and learning how men accidentally push against those fantasies without realizing it. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The avoidant doesn't leave because you weren't good enough. They leave because the dynamic stopped matching the version of closeness they can tolerate. When you understand that, everything shifts. You stop chasing reactions. You stop over-explaining. You stop trying to prove love. And instead, you learn how to show up in a way that feels grounded, self-led, and emotionally non-threatening. Qualities avoidants respond to naturally. This video is for men who are tired of feeling confused. Tired of mixed signals. Tired of being emotionally invested while pretending they're fine. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right, and still losing her, then this conversation is for you. Let's break it down calmly, honestly, and without illusions. Let me pull you closer for a second, because this part changes everything. If you've ever been confused by an avoidant woman, it's probably because you're asking the wrong question. You keep asking, why doesn't she see my value? When the real question is, how does she feel when she's around me? Here's the controversial truth most men don't want to hear. Avoidants don't attach to people first. They attach to internal experiences. That means she's not bonding to your intentions, your consistency, or even your effort. She's bonding to what her nervous system feels when she interacts with you. Calm or pressure, ease or obligation, freedom or expectation. And this is where men accidentally sabotage themselves. Most men believe attraction grows through showing up more. More texts, more reassurance, more emotional presence. But for an avoidant, more often feels like wait. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because closeness triggers their internal alarm system. So when you lean in emotionally, she doesn't feel loved. She feels watched. She feels responsible. She feels like something is being asked of her, even when you never said a word. Now here's the part that stings a little. The men avoidants stay emotionally hooked on are usually the ones who feel emotionally self-contained. Not distant. Not cold. Just grounded. These men aren't trying to be chosen. They're not chasing reassurance. They're not constantly checking if everything is okay. And because of that, the avoidant feels something rare around them: relief. Relief is the real fantasy. The fantasy isn't romance. It's not intensity. It's not even love in the traditional sense. It's the fantasy of being close without losing autonomy. When you understand this, you stop trying to perform connection. You stop leading with emotional explanations. You stop filling silence just to feel secure. And suddenly, the dynamic changes, not because you manipulated anything, but because you stopped overwhelming the space. Avoidants fall for how interactions feel, not how serious they are. This is why you'll see an avoidant light up around someone who isn't emotionally chasing them, but emotionally stable. Someone who enjoys connection but doesn't collapse without it. Someone who has a full life and doesn't make the relationship the center of their emotional world. And here's the part most men miss. That sense of emotional self-leadership creates curiosity. Curiosity is safe for avoidance. Intensity is not. When you become the guy who doesn't need constant reassurance, who doesn't panic at distance, who doesn't overinvest to prove worth, you become emotionally predictable in the best way. And predictability feels safe. This isn't about playing games. It's about emotional discipline. Because the moment you stop trying to force closeness, you give the avoidant room to choose it. And when an avoidant chooses closeness instead of feeling pushed into it, that's when attachment actually starts. In the next section, we're going to talk about the fantasy that matters more than affection itself, the fantasy of freedom, and why the moment you start needing her, everything quietly shifts against you. Stay with me. Let me say this quietly, because most men never hear it explained this way. An avoidant doesn't fear commitment the way people think. What they fear is emotional captivity, the feeling that someone else's emotional stability now depends on them. And here's the hard part. The moment you need her to feel okay, the dynamic changes, often without a single argument. Avoidants carry a deep fantasy of freedom. Not freedom to leave whenever they want, but freedom to exist without pressure. Freedom to come close without being consumed. Freedom to be wanted without being required. When you start relying on her for emotional regulation, your mood, your peace, your sense of worth, she feels it immediately. You may never say it out loud. You may think you're being calm and mature. But emotionally, the signal is loud. I need you to stay the same so I can feel okay. To an avoidant, that feels like a silent contract they never agreed to. Here's where men usually get confused. You think love is about merging lives, leaning on each other, and being emotionally available at all times. And with secure people, that can work beautifully. But with avoidance, that level of emotional dependency feels like responsibility before readiness. So when you start checking in too often, when you start needing reassurance, when your peace depends on her replies, her tone, her consistency, she doesn't feel loved. She feels responsible. And responsibility kills attraction for avoidance faster than conflict ever could. The controversial truth is this. Avoidants are most drawn to men who don't collapse emotionally when space appears. That doesn't mean you don't care. It means you don't panic. Men who can enjoy connection without clinging create a rare emotional environment. The avoidant feels free and valued at the same time. That combination is powerful because it's safe. Safety, to an avoidant, isn't constant closeness. It's knowing closeness won't cost them themselves. This is why the freedom fantasy matters so much. It's not about distance. It's about choice. Avoidants want to feel that they are choosing connection, not being pulled into it by someone else's emotional needs. When you lead a full life, your goals, your routines, your purpose, you stop subtly asking her to fill emotional gaps. And when that pressure disappears, her nervous system relaxes. She becomes more open, more curious, more willing to stay present. Ironically, the less you need her to stay, the safer it feels for her to do so. This isn't about withholding emotion. It's about self-regulation. When you regulate yourself, you become emotionally steady. And emotional steadiness is incredibly attractive to avoidants because it doesn't demand anything from them. It simply invites them in. In the next section, we'll talk about something even more uncomfortable for men. Why being too available doesn't make you reliable to an avoidant. It often makes you invisible. Stay with me. Let's talk about something that feels unfair but shows up again and again. When you're always available, always responsive, always emotionally present, you expect that consistency to be appreciated. You expect it to build trust. And logically, that makes sense. But to an avoidant, constant availability doesn't register as safety. It registers as pressure. Not obvious pressure. Not dramatic pressure. Subtle pressure. The kind that feels like there's no room to breathe. Avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional proximity. They track how much space they're allowed to have, even when nothing is being said. So when you're always there, always ready, always waiting, always prioritizing, the dynamic quietly shifts. You don't become more valuable. You become predictable in a way that removes curiosity. Curiosity matters more than reassurance to avoidance. When everything about you is accessible, explained, and emotionally open at all times, there's nothing for their system to lean toward. There's no sense of discovery. No emotional movement. Just presence that feels constant and heavy, even if your intentions are good. This is where many men feel confused and frustrated. You're not being needy. You're not asking for too much. You're just showing up. But avoidants don't experience availability the same way you do. To them, emotional closeness must come with space, or it starts to feel consuming. Being always available also removes polarity. Polarity isn't about playing hard to get. It's about having your own emotional gravity. When your time, energy, and focus are always open, it signals that your center of gravity has shifted toward the relationship. And for avoidants, that shift triggers discomfort. They don't want to feel like someone else's emotional world is orbiting them. This is why avoidants often pull back when things feel too easy. Not because they don't care, but because ease without space feels like enclosure. Men who remain visible to avoidants have something in common. They are emotionally present without being emotionally available on demand. They respond, but they don't hover. They care, but they don't revolve. They engage, but they don't dissolve into the connection. That balance creates emotional contrast. Contrast keeps interest alive. When you're grounded in your own rhythm, your pace, your priorities, your inner stability, you stop fading into the background. You're not trying to be noticed. You're simply showing up from a place of self-direction. And self-direction is deeply attractive to avoidants because it doesn't threaten their autonomy. The truth is, avoidants don't stay connected to availability. They stay connected to presence that doesn't demand. In the next section, we're going to turn the focus inward, and it might sting a little. We'll talk honestly about where men unintentionally give away their power, and what needs to change if you want a different outcome. Stay with me. Let's slow this down and be honest for a moment. This part isn't comfortable, but it's necessary. A lot of men don't lose avoidant women because they care too much. They lose them because they quietly abandon their self-respect in the hope of being chosen. You stop leading your own life. You adjust your boundaries to avoid tension. You over-explain your intentions so you won't be misunderstood. And without realizing it, you move from grounded presence into emotional auditioning. Avoidants pick up on this immediately. When a man is trying to be chosen, his energy changes. He becomes reactive instead of steady. He starts monitoring her moods, her distance, her engagement level. His actions stop coming from self-direction and start coming from fear of loss. That doesn't create safety. It creates imbalance. Here's the criticism men need to hear. If your emotional state rises and falls based on her availability, you are giving away your position in the dynamic. Respect doesn't come from being endlessly accommodating. It comes from emotional self-containment. Avoidants don't respect emotional collapse. They don't respect someone who shrinks themselves to maintain connection. Not because they're cruel, but because it signals instability. And instability feels unsafe to someone who already struggles with closeness. This doesn't mean you become cold or detached. It means you stop negotiating your worth. You don't chase clarity when space appears. You don't overcorrect when energy shifts. You don't abandon your boundaries to keep things smooth. Calm consistency beats emotional overinvestment every time. Here's the wake-up call. If you are constantly proving you're safe, you're already positioned as unsafe. Men who keep avoidance engaged aren't trying to convince. They're not explaining their value. They're not bending themselves into whatever shape feels least threatening. They are stable whether the avoidant leans in or pulls back. That stability commands respect. And respect is the foundation avoidants need before they can relax into connection. So here's the advice. Simple, but not easy. Stop centering the relationship above your own internal order. Have standards you don't negotiate. Have routines that don't disappear. Have emotional boundaries that don't move just because someone pulls away. When you do that, something shifts. The avoidant stops feeling like the emotional center of the dynamic, and that relief makes space for genuine interest. In the final section, we're going to talk about what happens when you stop chasing altogether and start leading your life fully, and why that's often the moment avoidants finally attach. Stay with me. Here's the part that feels almost backwards, but it's the truth most men discover too late. Avoidants don't attach when you pursue harder. They attach when you stop organizing your life around the relationship. This is not about withdrawal. It's not about pretending not to care. It's about leadership. Internal leadership. When you start leading your own life, something fundamental shifts in the dynamic. Your energy becomes settled. You're no longer scanning for signs, decoding silence, or adjusting yourself to maintain closeness. You're present when you're present, and whole when you're not. To an avoidant, this feels different immediately. They sense that you're not chasing an outcome. You're not trying to pull something from them. You're not waiting to be chosen. And that absence of pressure creates the one thing their system responds to best: voluntary closeness. Avoidants attach when closeness feels optional, not required. When you're deeply engaged in your own purpose, routines, friendships, and growth, the relationship becomes an addition, not a foundation. And paradoxically, that's what allows avoidants to lean in without fear. They don't feel trapped. They don't feel responsible for your emotional balance. They don't feel like distance will hurt you. That safety opens a door. Men often think leadership means control. It doesn't. Leadership is direction. It's knowing where your life is going regardless of who walks beside you. When you live that way, you stop chasing emotional validation, and validation becomes unnecessary. Avoidants are drawn to that self-direction because it mirrors what they value most: autonomy. But here's the deeper layer most men miss. When you stop chasing, you also stop waiting. You stop waiting for texts to feel calm. You stop waiting for reassurance to feel secure. You stop waiting for consistency to feel grounded. And in that grounded state, you become emotionally reliable. Not because you're always there, but because you're always yourself. That reliability is rare. Avoidants don't attach to intensity. They attach to steadiness. When they see that you're unaffected by temporary distance, they relax. When they realize connection doesn't cost them freedom, they soften. And when they sense that you're not dependent on the relationship for identity or peace, that's when attachment becomes possible. Not guaranteed, not forced, but real. This is where everything comes full circle. You don't keep an avoidant by holding on tighter. You keep them by letting go of the chase and standing firmly in your own life. And when an avoidant chooses to stay, not because they feel pressured, but because they feel free, that's the closest thing to commitment they can give. Now let's bring this home. Let me end this with a statement that's going to upset some people, but it needs to be said. Most avoidants don't leave because they're incapable of love. They leave because the men they're with stop being emotionally self-led. That's the real controversy. This was never about tricks, strategies, or getting someone to stay. It was about understanding a different emotional language and deciding whether you're willing to grow into the kind of man who speaks it naturally. If you take one thing from this video, let it be this: your power was never in chasing closeness. It was in building a life so solid that closeness became optional, not necessary. And when connection is optional, it becomes genuine. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with someone who pulled away the moment things felt stable? Have you noticed yourself giving more, explaining more, or shrinking just to keep someone close? Drop your experience in the comments. I read them, and I reach out. This channel isn't just about information. It's about conversation, reflection, and growth. You're not broken. You're not behind. You're just being asked to level up. And whether an avoidant stays or goes, the man you become by learning this never loses. We'll talk soon.